Well, let's take a look at what President Trump's budget proposal might mean for healthcare and more in the U.S. Robert Brusca, chief economist at FAO Economics, joins us live now. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So what's your overall impression of this budget plan?
Well, the president every year submits a budget, and then that budget is basically dead, and Congress reworks it and does what it wants to do. So what you learn from the budget is basically what the president wants to communicate about what he wants. And what we learn from this budget is not surprising. We learn that Mr. Trump wants to cut a lot of things. He wants to reduce the United States' exposure to international organizations, cut U.S. donations to World Health Organization. This is classically what Mr. Trump has done. So I think that we've learned that Donald Trump is still Donald Trump. He made it through impeachment, and he's the same guy.
So what does this then tell us about where President Trump's priorities lie, since we can see where he's cutting away?
Well, that's a little bit more complicated. I mean, to some extent, you see, he doesn't have the same commitment to the international community that the United States has had in the past. He wants other people to pay more of their own freight. In terms of these other cuts he's made domestically, what makes it complicated is that the cuts he has made are cuts to spending in the future. And so whether they turn out to be real cuts or not depends on whether or not there's going to be any reduction in, say, medical efficiencies. And one of the things the president has promised, and a lot of people are promising to do, for example, is to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. So if the cost of prescription drugs is reduced substantially, then future expenditures will be reduced substantially, and so you can cut spending without cutting the provision of services. So that's why I say it's complicated to figure out exactly what the budget means. But clearly he is cutting health care, and he's hoping to get some efficiencies. It's not so clear that he's saying that he's going to cut service, although it seems like he's trying to cut service in some places and to some classes of people, and that's also in keeping with Republicans and the kind of thing Mr. Trump has talked about doing in the past.
So then what would you say are some of the main criticisms in this budget proposal?
Well, given the way the U.S. economy is, with wealthy people doing so well and with such a dispersion of wealth, it's a little bit mean-spirited to be cutting these programs that poorer people depend on. So this is definitely not a magnanimous program by a benevolent president. This is not even something I would characterize as tough love. This is just tough without the love.
Now, it's interesting because this budget blueprint projects that the U.S. budget deficit will top $1 trillion this year, but then it will decline over the next decade. But the Congressional Budget Office says it will stay above $1 trillion for the next decade. How will that impact the economy, depending on who's right in their projections?
Well, of course, the Congressional Budget Office is going to have all different assumptions, not the assumptions Trump has. So to say that different people have different forecasts is not really very surprising. But I think it's probably also true that the Trump forecast has used some kind of generous visions of what the deficit's going to look like without taking steps. Most economists think that the deficits are big and they're too big, and we're going to need to take steps to bring them in, and that they're not going to reduce themselves automatically. So some president is going to have to come in and either begin to actually cut some expenditures or raise taxes or do both. And, of course, Mr. Trump seems like he's willing to cut some benefits. He doesn't want to touch taxes. The Democrats, on the other hand, who are vying for election at the end of the year, have all kinds of spending initiatives they want, and they would like you to believe that they can do it by just taxing wealthy people, but that doesn't seem very likely either. So, no matter which political party you listen to, they're both going to tell you something out of one side of the mouth, and maybe the truth will leak out of the other side, and maybe not.
So then perhaps in terms of something that both sides could agree on, how much do you think this budget could potentially be implemented as is?
Oh, nothing. There's no chance this budget's going to be implemented. Did you see the impeachment trial? The House is owned by the Democrats. The Republicans control the Senate, and the Republicans control the White House. And they're basically not talking with one another. They're fighting with one another. The chances of them getting some kind of compromise is very, very low. This is a very difficult thing. The impeachment was a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, and it declared war and we basically have warfare going into the elections, and we're not going to get any significant initiatives done until we pass the elections at the end of the year. The two parties really are basically feuding right now, and if we get any civility between them at all, it's surprising.
All right, well, contentious times indeed. Thank you so much. Robert Brusca there, Chief Economist at FAO Economics.